Hello from the KELOLAND Digital Desk, and thank you for joining us yet again for another edition of Weather or Not. Joining me is meteorologist Brian Karstens. I'm meteorologist Scott Mundt. And Brian, yesterday was a good day to kind of get ahead of the heat and humidity in case you had any chores or you want to get things off the list before all this comes in today and tomorrow.
Yes, the heat. I already noticed this morning the humidity higher. So today we're dealing with that subject. We're dealing with the hot temperatures. And, of course, the conversation will still revolve around some chances of storms. But at least last night was a little quieter. We did have a couple of thunderstorms isolated in the afternoon and even in the evening hours in the Black Hills. But tonight, awfully rough in North Dakota. This is going to be their night, and that could include parts of South Dakota as well.
Yeah, we'll watch the storm complex develop first in North Dakota, and we'll see how much of that transitions south into maybe north-central South Dakota and northeastern KELOLAND. But I think it will happen late in the day. A lot of this probably near sunset or after sunset. We're already, as Brian mentioned, with some humidity in the air. With it, we'll have temperatures in the 80s, 90s, a couple of 100s today across the west. Try to get to our weekend forecast, even talk about the pattern. And, Brian, I don't think I showed you or talked to you about some information on Watertown. I went several months back on some precipitation numbers.
Okay.
We'll try to get to that maybe toward the end of the show.
I like that.
Here's Futurecast for today. As we get into the afternoon, you notice thicker clouds. It's interesting to see that it's trying to develop this in the south-central South Dakota. It may be an isolated shower, thunderstorm, at least according to the model, late afternoon, early evening. But what we talked about was what's expected to happen here into North Dakota. Some stronger weather will develop during the afternoon and evening. We'll see how far south those thunderstorms tend to grow. Right now, it's trying to put some of that maybe during the evening hours in the northwestern South Dakota, eventually trying to move into north-central South Dakota as we hit maybe the midnight hour. But according to the latest run here, a lot of this is trying to stay to the north into North Dakota, and that's where they do have that enhanced risk for severe weather today. That's level 3 out of 5 with all modes of severe weather possible. We'll talk about our chances in KELOLAND coming up. Welcome back to Weather or Not. Brian, it's time to talk about maybe the strong to severe weather. I've been trying to, really emphasize this late today, more so during the evening hours, going into the overnight, not only for today, but for tomorrow as well.
Yeah, the timing on these storms, it makes a difference because when people are active and doing things during the day part, forecasts, we don't expect the storms to be nearly as organized, or even in particular, like tonight's example, a lot of this blows up in North Dakota, and if it does sneak into the north, it will be late. And you and I were just talking here about even like Sisseton. Some of those severe weather parameters are actually peaking after midnight. And so with that in mind, one of the things that I would encourage people to do, and this is always maybe a blanket statement, but when it comes to severe weather safety, having a weather radio, and I know many of us rely on our phones for weather alerts, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is, does your phone wake you up at 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning if something were to come up?
Especially if you have your phone set to vibrate.
Well, right.
Will you be able to hear that?
And are you getting your push notifications with a sound, or does it just vibrate? Because that's one thing I think about a lot on my phone. Obviously, when it's in the studio, I got to be careful on which setting it is. But the thing about a weather radio, and I know that that's something we go back to, but it's especially important when we're getting into those hours of the day when people are sleeping, because it is designed, if you program a weather radio, a modern weather radio.
Yes, I was about to say, too, the way the weather radios are today, a lot different than what they were 15, 20 years ago.
Right. Yeah, the older ones are fine if you want to take it along camping and you want to just know the general area I'm in. If you want to hear about those kind of things, that's fine. But obviously, we've programmed these for several years now. But when you have your county code programmed into your weather radio, it's only going to go off for your county. So let's take, for example, tonight's weather. So you get a scenario where storms are up in North Dakota, and they're rolling east. And in fact, they could really be a troublemakers. So if you're like, say, New Effington or Britain or Hecla or Eureka, do you get into a scenario where those things are coming at you late tonight? And that could happen. If I were in that area, I'd have a weather radio on tonight, Scott. I don't think I would mess around with that because that stuff is mean up there. The Storm Prediction Center even used the word derecho tonight for North Dakota, or at least the possibility that exists. I know you're going to take us now through a couple of the models here.
Well, here is a look at the Storm Prediction Center outlook in North Dakota. Do you see that orange? That's an enhanced risk for severe weather. Been mentioning that it's probably something that will hit South Dakota if it does during the evening, overnight hours. So I went ahead and labeled it after 7 for north central South Dakota, and you can extend that to the east, maybe even make it a little bit later in the evening or overnight into northeastern South Dakota. So that's what the Storm Prediction Center is saying right now. And you mentioned they even use the word derecho. We'll have to see where that goes once things do develop. Will it move straight east? Will it take a turn to the southeast and eventually move into maybe north central, northeastern South Dakota? So here's a look at what one model is thinking. We're looking at this area here in the north central South Dakota for showers and thunderstorms. Now, this run here, it may be just a little bit too far to the south. We'll see what the new updates say as they do come in. But we are continuing that chance for showers and thunderstorms during the evening, into the overnight, even spilling into tomorrow morning. Now, as they do move into southeastern South Dakota, I think they will weaken. The model's thinking that as well. It completely gets rid of it. And once we get into tomorrow, we're not done. We'll have another round of thunderstorms that will develop first into probably eastern North Dakota, and then we'll see how these grow to the south. You can see that by 10 o'clock in the evening. I would say anywhere from Aberdeen, Huron, over toward Brookings, Marshall, areas to the north. As we get into the evening hours, late evening hours, towards sunset and after, we'll probably see that development. And you can see that on Futurecast at 10 o'clock. Should mention as well periods of heavy rain. Looks like Watertown's almost in the middle of that. For the overnight, that eventually moves into southeastern South Dakota, Minnesota, northwestern Iowa. And then once we get into Saturday itself, looks like we'll have a dry day, decrease in cloud cover. We'll have westerly winds, cooler temperatures, and drier air. We'll have lower dew point temperatures for all of the weekend. Those numbers probably retreating to the 50s and 60s. So I think once we get into the weekend, it should feel a lot more comfortable.
Right, and that's a good spot to land on this, because obviously you got to get through a couple of days where it's not going to feel so nice outside with the heat index. So, yeah, a lot of those talking points, Scott, we talk about, the ingredients list for these storms. Every situation's a little different, but I have to say that this situation reminds me a lot of what we saw back in June. I remember there was a weekend. I can't tell you the exact dates, but I know that there was it was probably around the 20th or 21st, because that's when I think Sioux Falls hit 99. We had all the heat here in South Dakota, and everything just pushed to the north. That's right. And that so on that particular day, you're right, we were extremely hot in Sioux Falls, and then all of that bottled up. Basically, no way that we could erupt storms far south in southern South Dakota, but it was all North Dakota. And then they ended up with a big bow echo. I remember that coming out of Bismarck and then eventually toward Fargo. But they had some individual big supercells with large tornadoes. Really kind of a scary night.
Was this at night? This was after sunset.
Well, it developed in the evening, yeah, but they still had EF3 tornadoes on the ground, pretty large ones at 11:30 at night. Mm-hmm. So, again, not to say that that's what's going to happen tonight, but it just lends itself to the fact that you can get tornadic activity, you can get those storms at night. And going back to my weather radio, soapbox here a little bit, if you don't know where to get one, usually most retail stores you'll be able to find. I know a lot of hardware stores will sell them, and if you don't find them right away, you can, usually there'll be a store that'll have that. But again, you need to program it to have your county code. And there's actually some links on the National Weather Service homepage too. Aberdeen will have that. And one other thing, too, is if you don't get a storm tonight, well, it's just like a little insurance policy that maybe, hey, it's not going to hurt to have the weather radio on, right? And just monitoring things just in case. Here's all this starch in the air too, Scott. This has been a story that we've repeated several times this summer. This is the picture tomorrow afternoon. So we're about to the top of my legend on the screen. You got the low, the moderate, and the extreme. And it is true. The amount of available energy is really, really high. The Storm Prediction Center has struggled a little bit like we have with how this whole thing, do we have most of the storms up in North Dakota again? And how many will form on the backside of the front? There's actually a little evidence of that. So I imagine the nuances of this will come into play. I even noticed something interesting, too, that the storms in North Dakota, even on some of the recent developing trends, even though some of them don't produce rain in our region, they do try to push the outflow boundary south. And see, that's another thing. Those little outflow boundaries, those can be sneaky. They could enhance some of the convergence for the next day. And honestly, Scott, we don't know that yet because
we have to figure out where the storms develop.
Right. We got to wait till tonight to sort all that out. So you can only make so many assumptions, and then you have to just let the weather play out and then follow the trends as they develop.
You know what the trends have been? Heavy rainfall for a lot of us when these storms do develop. So here's a look at our available moisture. Once we get into that red category, that's a good location to probably pick up the heavy rain with any storms that move through that area. And this is picking up on Mobridge, north central South Dakota during the evening hours after sunset. And then it slowly makes its way to the southeast during the overnight hours. And I showed you a futurecast where it weakens the storm as it moves in the eastern South Dakota. And you may notice, too, that the amount of moisture that's available is not as high as what it was, and a lot of that goes away by sunrise. But it comes back as we do get into Friday, and Friday's weather, the same thing, except it's moved a little bit farther to the east. But any storms that do develop in eastern, southeastern KELOLAND, again, and there's that potential to see some periods of heavy rainfall across not only eastern South Dakota, but western Minnesota. We touched a little bit on this, Brian, the heat and humidity. That's here today and tomorrow, especially across eastern South Dakota.
Yeah, and, speaking of, of course, this afternoon, we've got some heat advisories in progress west of Sioux Falls, but tomorrow we're almost a shoe-in for more advisories for heat. So humidity, when you get dew points in the 70s, it's tropical, and anything close to 80 is downright jungle-like, I would say.
Look at Sioux Falls tomorrow afternoon. This is a model run, 78. Yeah. You mentioned, the magic number of 80, 79, Sioux City, 77 in Spencer. So even tomorrow afternoon, eastern South Dakota, Minnesota, and Iowa able to bring those dew point temperatures in the 70s. But once we hit the weekend, and we talked about this, not as humid, a little cooler. The cold front will be to our east. Behind it, a lot of us probably with that quick west to northwest wind to help bring in that cooler and drier air. Just labeled it as less humid. We'll still have dew point temperatures in the 60s, but it won't be as humid as what's expected today and for tomorrow. So that will also cut back on our rain chances. We're going mostly dry this weekend. You may notice the forecast, saying a 20% chance here and there, but otherwise it looks like mostly dry skies in our forecast for this weekend. This is a look at the heat index for today, showing those temperatures in the 100s in south central South Dakota. Even Sioux Falls is touching 100. Mitchell at 100, 102 in Yankton. And you can expect the same thing for Friday. And as you mentioned, Brian, yes, we do have heat advisories out for today, parts of south central South Dakota. Don't be surprised if you see those across the east for tomorrow.
Right. Yep. It appears that is very, very likely to be the story here. Now, the weekend, it's nice to say that the heat index will likely be tossed out of the weather shows. I don't think we're planning on showing it. At least no need to. Highs in the 80s, and I can handle that.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about the weekend coming up. Welcome back to Whether or Not. The weekend is just about here. Let's talk about what you can expect with the weather. Now, we mentioned earlier that we could still have a couple of lingering showers, thunderstorms in parts of southeastern South Dakota, Iowa, and Minnesota early in the weekend. That's Saturday morning. I think what will happen, a lot of that will go away. We'll have a decrease in cloud cover. Temperatures will eventually warm to the 70s and 80s. We'll keep things dry during the day. And then as we do get into Sunday, looks like we'll try to do the same thing. It'll be interesting to see how cool the temperatures are across western South Dakota, say into the hills of western KELOLAND. They may stay in the 70s throughout the weekend. That'll be a good break from all the heat and not the humidity, but the heat that they've had across western South Dakota. Today's forecast numbers into the triple digits, parts of western and southwestern South Dakota. So as we get into the afternoon on Sunday, notice how the temperatures do warm. There may be an isolated shower or thunderstorm that you see there on Futurecast across the hills of western KELOLAND. Otherwise, expect dry skies. We talked about the decrease in the humidity too. And I would say seasonal temperatures, numbers in the 80s. Okay, how about the pattern? This is the 500 millibar pattern. This will loop through about 5 times. We take an early quick glance at this where we have high pressure, low pressure, troughs, ridges in the atmosphere. It just gives us a general idea as to what we can expect with the weather. And we have a lot of things dancing through the northern plains as we do go over the next 2 weeks. And here's a closer look at things. This is for this coming weekend. So we have this parent low here right on the border of Canada and the United States. That will help bring in our thunderstorm chances as we go over the next couple of days leading into the weekend. We've always been talking about this high pressure system to our south. It seems like we've been talking about that all summer long, as that really dictates how warm we get. And then notice how that swings back and forth across the southwestern United States. It never really makes a push to get into the central United States or even trying to show a ridge that will eventually move into the upper plains. So we'll probably keep our temperatures pretty close to average as we do go into next week. And then as we get into maybe next weekend, look what's happening. We've seen this before this year. High pressure right over Texas and Oklahoma. This area of low pressure that I drew in, watch what happens. It will eventually try to make its way into KELOLAND as we get into, I think it's around the 20th or 21st, right before the 20th. So on the 19th, you can see we have something trying to move through Nebraska, maybe South Dakota. That will probably bring in another round of thunderstorms. And it goes without saying, strong to severe weather. Anytime we've had those things run across that high pressure system, able to bring in the strong to severe weather. So Brian will continue with more or less this active pattern that we've been in. I really don't see any reason to shy away from it. We'll bring in these steady chances for rain. And I think you mentioned before the timing of the rain and the amount of rain has been really beneficial for many. And I know not for everybody. We've had some flooding going on, especially in the northeastern South Dakota. But I think the ground's been doing a pretty good job for a lot of us able to soak this up.
Well, going into the growing season, we were so dry, and now the rains. And the fact is that we've been getting the heavier rains in July, which is arguably probably one of the best months to soak it up. If you look at the Big Sioux River right now, it's up a little bit around the Sioux Falls area, but frankly, a lot of that rain to the north has just kind of gotten absorbed into the watershed. The crops are consuming the water very quickly. But I do want to add to your point about the expectation that things could continue to be rainy at times. You know, it's interesting when you look at the patterns of those troughs and ridges. This is actually the AI version of the European model, and this is at least the latest batch of data that we've got. So it takes the first system this weekend right there in North Dakota and southern Canada, and then as you mentioned, you kind of kick this thing out, you know, later next week. It gives some broad troughing across the west. So you acknowledge there's maybe a low that kind of kicks out. And then you got that big centroid of the heat down in Texas. But you know what? Another little side note, little wild cards that play out in the long term.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah, that's kind of and I know people that live in Florida and have family in Florida. That is something of interest there. Now, of course, you know, you look out that far, it's a little hard to say. But there are a lot of forecasters that have been, you know, sounding off on the tropics being active. The Atlantic Basin is prime for some big stuff. So keep that in mind when you get these big ridges over the top of a tropical system like that. That's a really favorable pattern for something to come out of the Caribbean. Again, it's showing up there on the models, so it's a little ways out. And I don't get too worked up on, obviously from our vantage point, we're more or less just long observers away from those things. But I always say, if you get tropical weather, that is going to affect the jet stream, and eventually it does affect us in an indirect way.
And it's the second half of August, too. So
Right.
these types of things are expected. But, Brian, I want to just bring back the model that I showed a little bit ago. This is going off the European. It shows the same thing. I just had to change the view because it is a little bit farther to the south.
Yep.
See that running through, eventually getting into the Gulf. And there's another thing working out here.
It is, yeah. And anytime you see that big ridging like St. Louis and Atlanta, if that high pressure sprawls out like that, hurricanes really, they thrive in an environment where you can park some upper level ridging to the north because it enables that storm to ventilate out the top, and you don't want to have a lot of shear because that kind of, basically it's interesting because it really is, if you think about it, almost the opposite of what we use for our severe weather forecasting here. We actually look at shear as a factor that blows up these storms, and that wind aloft can actually work to enabling those. In the tropics, totally different thing. It's all the heat's coming from all that high humid and high water content, the moisture content of the ocean. So again, totally different subject, but I think in the world of weather, whenever we get into hurricane season, it doesn't matter where you're at. I know there are lots of people that pay attention to that. So just putting that out there, yeah, get into the second, third week of August, watching that.
And in the meantime, for us, mentioned that the active pattern is expected to continue, but, you see something like that in the modeling, if it holds true, that can really change things up. But we'll watch it as things do progress. I want to show you, before we get to your graphic again, Brian, this. I was just looking at the temperature anomaly here. This is at the tail end. So we're looking out about, a week and a half, 2 weeks. Look at that. It's trying to bring in this cold air again coming in from Canada across the northern plains. We'll see if that holds true to see if we get another quick cool down. Now, I remember, I was going to throw this out there too. The cicadas came out, I think, around the 4th of July.
Yes.
So was it, or maybe the middle of July, because you have to give it 6 weeks, and it was kind of pointing to the last week of August. The folklore goes, you hear the cicadas, you get frost in 6 weeks.
Well, and
I mean, will we get that? Right now, I would say no.
Well, yeah, there's probably, we still have plenty of summer, obviously, ahead of us.
Right.
But
I like that it's showing it's trying to cool off, and I just find that kind of interesting, too.
Well, cold fronts have been, and they usually are stronger than what the modeling indicates, so keep that in mind. And obviously, as we entertain the idea of fronts coming through, here's another little interesting map that I wanted to visit quickly about. This is the precipitation totals on the European extended. Now, when I say extended, this product actually goes way out. We don't show this on television. I don't even think, if we do, it's very, very seldom. But you notice the tropics, Florida, it picks up on some of those general trends there. It keeps the Dakotas, Minnesota, Iowa kind of wet. You can see where the ridge placement is across the Southwest. They need rain. They're not getting it. They've got fire problems and all the rest there. Then do you see there a little example of something that sneaks into Texas, and it comes all the way up into Nebraska and Iowa there? Do you see that bending arc there? And look where it parks some heavy rains in early September. That's an interesting thing just to see if that happens, because there have been some early burn indicators that we could be wet.
And it continues to do that as you go through time. It just continues to add the rain in that same location.
There's more rain in Omaha, Nebraska, and north of Des Moines, Iowa, in that period through mid-September than there is along the Gulf Coast. So I'll just say that that's something to watch. But if anybody thinks we're going into a hot, dry pattern, I don't see that. That doesn't seem to be any of the evidence there or anything that's long-term for that.
Yeah, we'll be hot at times.
Yep, at times.
Humid too, but time's not on our side either. I think we're losing 2.5 minutes of daylight per day now, or close to that.
Yeah, so just, again, little things that we can share. There's plenty of other products. I have a couple of other ones. This one doesn't go out as far. This only goes out to mid-August, but you can definitely see southern Canada, too, picking up some bigger rains, hopefully helping these fires up north, too. It's been really a rough summer, so areas of the country that could use some more moisture, or at least into Canada, too. The Southwest is pretty dry, but we're definitely still in a pattern where some thunderstorms will come along, but not every day the next week. We've got some gaps next week.
Yeah,
for
we'll
sure.
have periods of dry weather. The heat will come back. The humidity will come back. But again, just more evidence that it is showing that things will remain active. Again, it's not every day, though. When we get into some of these strong to severe weather patterns, it almost seems like it's been every day. But it won't be every day as we do go forward through the rest of the month. But pay attention to the weather as the strong to severe thunderstorms are in the immediate forecast, and then we'll see what happens as we get into the second half of August. But from what Brian just showed us, it looks like the active weather will continue.
Yeah, so there's definitely moisture there in the atmosphere. Dew points are still going to be plenty high. You can see across much of the midsection of the country how that green shows us the dew points. You can see we're pretty much going to stay at times higher, and the tropics will eventually feed into that. So, Scott, it'll be, I'm sure, a busy rest of the month.
Okay, I want to try to get this in. We talked about Watertown yesterday, and I did the calendar here for the June, July, and we are now in the 7th of August for the rainfall. Well, we had the 6 inches in June, or just shy of 6 inches. In July, Watertown, 6 2/3. And for the month of August so far, we are at, I need to add to that number, it's just over 2.5. And the climate average is 2.89. I did some research, Brian. What do you think about this? The heaviest snows in Watertown, November through February. The heaviest snow, 3 inches. The heaviest rain during the summer so far, 2.09. I find these numbers to be a little interesting, that our heaviest rains get into, the top 3, if you just, move that over for snowfall, or even above at that 209.
Wow.
I just find, I find that a little interesting myself.
Yeah.
Typically when you go through the winter months, and I even added November, we should get maybe some higher totals there for snowfall for a one-day period. Now, Watertown did when we got into March and even April, early April. I think they even had a day of 8 inches of snow one of those days.
Okay, yeah. And, the winter, as quiet as it was, it ended up having, we had a couple things here and there, but we were so dry for such a long time going into the spring, and then thinking about, are we going to get enough rain? Are we going to get enough rain? And then, the rains have come, and Watertown has definitely well exceeded some of those, initial thoughts. So now at this point in the summer, I'm curious to see what we start seeing as we get towards September, seeing how these trends continue and if it becomes a wet fall, because that would be quite a contrast. We haven't had a wet fall for a while. It's been, I know back in that 2018, 2019 time period, I know we had some really wet spells in there, but several of these falls have been just very quiet. So it can come back. I remember 2010, I believe, if memory serves. September of that year was very wet because I remember all the rivers were flooding back in that time. And that was, again, a case where the tropics really lit up and we got all this, humidity, and these fronts kept coming through. And then we started getting just big, heavy rain totals in September. And then when that starts, then the farmers can't get in the field. So you have to be a little bit aware of that, because we're not the first ones to mention that. I've heard that some other colleagues of ours have mentioned that possibility that we do get into a wetter pattern this fall.
So, and with that, what happens in the winter, we'll have to wait for that answer.
Wait and see.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us on this latest edition of Weather or Not. Have yourself a great day.